The sun clawed at the earth, baking the land into cracks and scars that matched the ones in Clara Whitlock's heart. The wind moved like a whip, dragging dust across the prairie, hissing through the brittle grass, and whispering the town's cruel names for her. Barren, cursed, deserted. Clara stood at the edge of her porch, one hand gripping the post, the other shielding her eyes from the glare. Her dress was plain and sun-bleached, her boots caked in the stubborn red clay that never seemed to wash out. From this high perch above Elkhorn Ridge, she could see the thread of the trail her husband had vanished down 6 months ago and never returned. Jeb Whitlock had been a man of pride, not affection. He worked the land like it owed him something, and spoke to Clara like she was just another field to plow, useful only if fertile. When no child came after 5 years of marriage, his warmth turned to rust. At first it was silence, then scorn, and finally departure. He didn't leave with a bang or a fight, just a note, scribbled with the same blunt cruelty he once reserved for broken tools. Asterisk, you were never enough. I need a real wife. Asterisk. Clara burned that note the same day she buried the ring. Now the only sound on the ranch came from the creak of the porch swing and the distant lowing of a solitary cow. The ranch had shrunk with Jeb gone, both in labor and in spirit. But Clara didn't complain. She worked the land herself, split wood, patched fences, even birthed a foal alone one brutal spring morning. Each task hammered her grief into calluses. The townsfolk watched from their distance, some out of pity, others out of scorn. In the saloon, she was a cautionary tale. In the church, a whispered prayer. The preacher offered quiet support when he passed by once a month, dropping off a loaf of cornbread and a few scriptures tucked inside. But even his eyes carried the weight of things unsaid. Only young Eli, the blacksmith's son, treated her like someone worth more than gossip. He'd wave when he saw her at the general store, sometimes stammer a hello, his freckles flaring brighter than his hair. But Clara knew better than to hope. This land was no place for soft beginnings. Twilight came down like a curtain, bleeding orange and violet across the sky. Clara lit a lantern and brought it into the kitchen. The wind moaned low around the corners of the cabin, stirring the shutters, knocking dry leaves against the sill. She had just set a kettle over the fire when a sound, sharp and sudden, cut through the hush. Hooves. Her hand found the shotgun leaning by the door. She didn't call out. If it was a rider, they'd announce themselves. If not, the barrel would do the talking. The horse was lathered in sweat, its breath ragged. The man on its back was worse, slumped, bloody, barely clinging to the saddle. His face was shadowed beneath a hat crusted with dust, but one look told her he wasn't long for the saddle. She approached slowly, cautiously. The stranger tried to speak, but slumped forward, toppling into her arms with the dead weight of exhaustion. His coat was torn, dark with blood. A bullet had found him, or maybe more. God help me, Clara muttered. She dragged him inside with the strength of a life lived on hard labor. He groaned faintly as she lowered him onto the cot. Fever was already on him, skin hot as coal, lips cracked. She unbuttoned his coat and winced. There was a wound just above his hip. Clean entry, no exit. Not fresh, but still angry. He needed help she couldn't give. But help wouldn't come fast enough from town, not at this hour, and certainly not for a stranger. So Clara boiled water, dug out the old whiskey bottle, and did what had to be done. The man didn't scream, just clenched his jaw and stared at the ceiling with eyes that flickered like flame light, gray, intense, holding something too proud to break. When she was done, she stitched the wound with steady hands, wrapped him in clean linen, and set a wet cloth to his brow. Outside, the wind howled louder. Inside, the only sound was the slow tick of the clock above the hearth and the ragged breath of the man, whose name she did not know. She watched him through the flicker of lantern light, searching his face for the familiar cruelty she had come to expect in men. But there was only pain. And something else, something worn down and weathered, like her own reflection in the wash-basin mirror. She should have been afraid. A strange man. Blood. No name. But all she felt was a strange calm. That night, Clara sat beside the cot with her shotgun across her lap and sleep clawing at her eyes. The stranger slept fitfully, twitching now and then, murmuring words she couldn't catch. Before dawn, a knock came at the door. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Clara stood, heart thudding in her throat. She moved to the door, finger resting on the trigger. But when she opened it, there was no one there. Only the wind, only the darkness, only the whisper of change, beginning to stir. By the time the stranger's eyes opened, 2 days had passed and the fever had nearly claimed him. Clara had kept the cloths damp, the fire low, and her nerves sharp. She hadn't slept much. The shotgun stayed near, but untouched. She wasn't sure if it was for him or for what might follow him. He blinked slowly, gaze sweeping the small cabin's beams and shadows before settling on her. "You're not dead," she said flatly, not rising from her stool. He tried to speak, but managed only a dry rasp. She poured a cup of water and brought it to his lips. He drank greedily until she pulled it back. "Sip, or you'll choke." His voice was a husk when it came. "Where?" "My ranch, south of Elkhorn Ridge. You bled out on my front porch. Lucky I wasn't feeling cruel that night." He gave a soft grunt, half thanks, half pain, and tried to sit up. The movement lit his side on fire, and he collapsed back onto the pillow, jaw clenched. "Bullet went clean in. I patched it," Clara said. "Didn't see an exit. Either it's still in you or you're real lucky." He took a few slow breaths, the color already draining from his face again. "Name's Reed." She nodded. "Clara." They left it there. In the days that followed, Reed didn't say much. He healed slowly, sleep-thin and sweat-soaked, but his strength returned with each meal Clara put in front of him. He never asked questions, and she didn't volunteer answers. He helped where he could, mending a fence with one hand, sweeping the barn, even fixing a broken hinge on the door with an unspoken skill that didn't quite match a drifter's life. He had manners, the quiet kind. He always looked her in the eye when he spoke, never let his gaze linger too long. There was no false charm, no grin hungry for power, just a wariness she recognized. Still, Clara watched him like a coyote watches a campfire. Warmth was tempting, but she knew better than to trust something with teeth. At night, after chores, they sat in silence, the fire casting their shadows across the worn cabin floor. Once, she asked him where he'd come from. He gave a crooked smile. "Nowhere good." She didn't press. But silence breeds speculation, and in Elkhorn Ridge, rumor traveled faster than a wildfire in a canyon breeze. On her next supply run, Clara felt the weight of eyes. Tommy Finch, the store clerk, leaned in a little too close as he handed her a sack of flour. "You keeping a man up at your place, Miss Whitlock?" he asked, voice oily with suggestion. Clara didn't answer, just met his gaze long enough for his smirk to falter. She paid and left without another word. By the time she returned home, Reed was chopping kindling. Shirt off, wound still healing but his movements sharp and practiced. The axe rose and fell in clean, efficient arcs. "You ought to rest more," she called as she dismounted. He looked up. "Resting makes me feel useless." "Then you're fitting in just fine." That night, she brought out a bottle of whiskey, untouched since Jeb left. She poured them each a small glass. The fire popped between them. "You a criminal, Reed?" she asked without looking at him. He didn't flinch. "Why ask?" "Because people in town are talking. You came in bleeding. Quiet. Skilled. You're either a criminal or a lawman, and I don't trust either." He nodded slowly, then took a sip. "I ain't a lawman." Clara studied him. "So which is it?" Reed set his glass down. "I took money from men who had too much. Did it clean. No one dead, until someone else made it messy. And now I'm tired. Tired of running. Tired of being blamed for what others chose to do." She believed him. Or maybe she wanted to. The land did things to people. Made them hard. Made them desperate. Clara knew what it meant to be judged by a story half heard. She exhaled slowly. "They'll come for you." "They might," he said. "But I didn't come here to bring trouble." "Well," Clara said, standing to refill the wood bin. "Trouble's already sniffing around." 2 nights later, she found a scrap of paper wedged under her door. No signature, just a name written in a hurried scrawl, Jeb Whitlock. Her hand tightened around the paper. She hadn't spoken his name aloud in months. Hadn't heard it from another in longer. That he might be near again stirred something bitter and raw. She didn't mention the note to Reed. Not yet. Instead, she watched the horizon more often, her rifle closer to hand, her sleep thinner. Whatever quiet they'd found was starting to crack, and the past, it seemed, was ready to come calling. The desert wind carried the stench of memory. Dry sage, scorched earth, the faint iron scent of blood long buried. Clara smelled it all as she rode beside Reed, the moon casting silver trails across the canyon floor. They didn't speak much. Words would only scatter focus, and tonight required clarity. The return of her husband had stripped any illusions from her life. It was no longer about grief or healing. It was about reckoning. Reed rode stiffly, every bump jarring the wound he still carried, but his grip on the reins never faltered. He hadn't asked why she knew the canyon so well, nor how she was certain Jeb was tied to the outlaws hiding there. She appreciated that. Some men tried to solve a woman like a riddle, always looking for edges to press. Reed simply followed her lead, eyes sharp, jaw tight. "You sure this is the trail?" he asked as their horses picked their way between boulders and scrub. "I lived with that man 5 years," she said. "I know how he thinks. He wouldn't be far from water, but far enough from town to keep tongues quiet." They came to a rise, where the canyon walls narrowed. Clara held up a hand. Below, in the crook of a bend, a faint glow flickered. A campfire, low and hidden, but not enough. A cluster of horses stood nearby, restless, but tethered. Clara dismounted and crouched, rifle slung over her shoulder. Reed joined her, breathing shallow, eyes fixed. "How many?" he asked. "3 by the fire. 2 more keeping watch near the bluff." Her voice was flat, devoid of doubt. "You see all that in one glance." She didn't look at him. "Told you. My father was a different kind of rancher." Reed nodded once. "So what's the plan?" "We wait. We listen. And we hope they start talking." The minutes stretched long and tense. Crickets filled the silence with their endless chant, and the fire below crackled softly. A voice broke the stillness. "You think the marshal will really take the bait?" someone asked. "He'll take whatever Jeb Whitlock feeds him," came the reply, oily and amused. "That marshal's tired. Wants to close the book on this mess. Hang one outlaw and call it justice." Clara didn't flinch, but Reed saw the tremor in her fingers tighten on the stock of her rifle. "You really trust Jeb?" A third voice cut in sharper. "He talks too much. Got a twitchy look about him. Long as he keeps feeding the lawman stories, and we keep clearing the trails, I don't care if he talks in his sleep. Once the Hollis man swings, Jeb gets his clean slate, and we disappear south." Reed exhaled through his nose, quiet and bitter. "They think I'm dead already." "They will be," Clara muttered. They crawled back from the ridge without sound. Once they were clear, she rose and turned to Reed. "We bring this back to Lanton. If he's got any honor left, it'll be enough to turn him." "You think he'll believe us?" Reed asked. "I think he'll believe the threat of exposure. Lawmen don't like being played." They made it back to the ranch by dawn, dust on their coats and purpose in their stride. Clara wasted no time. She scrawled the names they overheard, the location, every detail. Then she rode into town with Reed close behind. The town was still waking. Smoke rose from chimneys, and store shutters creaked open. Clara dismounted at the marshal's office and pounded on the door. Marshal Lanton answered, boots half-laced, eyes bleary. They stepped inside before he could object. "You've been lied to," Clara said, handing over the note. "Jeb's in with the same men he swore to name. We heard them talking. They're planning to vanish the moment you hang Reed." Lanton scanned the note, face tightening as he read. "These names, you're sure?" "Sure as I ever was Jeb would leave me when I didn't give him a child," she said. "And just as sure he'd find a way to crawl back when he needed something." Lanton cursed under his breath. "If this is true, I can't hang Reed. But I'll need more than words." Reed stepped forward. "Then ride with us. Catch them in the act." The marshal looked at them, long and hard. Finally, he nodded. "I'll get my men." As they turned to leave, Clara paused. "One more thing," she said. "I want to be there when it happens." Lanton didn't argue. By dusk, 5 riders cut a quiet path toward the canyons, dust rising behind them like a storm cloud. Clara rode at the front, eyes narrowed, breath steady. The past wasn't just returning. She was riding straight into it, rifle loaded, heart clear. And this time, it would not escape her justice. The canyon swallowed sound, steep walls rising like the sides of a wound too old to bleed. Dusk dulled the sky to a smoky lavender, and the riders moved like ghosts, hooves muffled by sand and stone. Marshal Lanton rode at the center, his jaw tight, hat low. His 2 deputies flanked him, green in the eyes but holding their rifles like they meant it. Reed kept beside Clara, who led them with the quiet certainty of a woman who had nothing left to fear. They reached the ridge without incident. Below, the same campfire burned low, careless. Shadows hunched over it, 5 men, exactly as before. One stood apart, pacing, his voice drifting upward. Jeb. Clara knelt, rifle already braced on the rocks. Her breath came slow, measured, notched like a gear turning toward something final. You sure you want to be the one to pull the trigger? Lanton asked quietly. I won't shoot him in the back, she said. But if he reaches for a gun, I'll put him down. The marshal nodded once. Fair enough. He gave a quick signal. His deputies began moving wide to flank the camp. Reed stayed at Clara's side. You ever done this? He asked. Her eyes didn't leave Jeb. No, but I've imagined it enough. Down below, the outlaws grew restless. One man, broad-shouldered, coat patched in black leather, rose suddenly, scanning the ridge. They know, Reed muttered. We waited too long. Not too long, Clara replied. Jeb shouted something, drawing a pistol from his belt, but he wasn't pointing it at the fire. He was pointing at the shadows beyond it. Clara saw the treachery bloom too late. Gunfire erupted like a thunderclap. One of Lanton's deputies went down screaming. The other returned fire, missing wildly. The outlaws scattered, seeking cover behind rocks and scrub. Go! Lanton barked, charging downhill, revolver drawn. Reed hesitated, but Clara was already moving, rifle to shoulder, feet sure on the slope. She fired once, catching a man in the leg as he tried to run. He dropped, screaming. Another turned to aim, and Reed shot him clean through the chest. Smoke curled through the canyon. The firefight grew tight, desperate. Jeb moved fast, ducking behind a boulder, reloading with terrifying ease. Clara tracked him, but couldn't get a clean shot. Suddenly, he was gone. She scanned the rocks. He's circling. He's coming for the horses. Reed swore and took off, gun drawn. Clara followed, breath ragged, boots slipping on loose stone. They reached the edge of the canyon where the horses were tied, and there he was. Jeb was already on a saddle, reins in hand, but his eyes met Clara's before he could kick off. That old smirk returned. Clara, he said, voice almost gentle, didn't think you'd really want me dead. I don't, she said, stepping forward, but I want you gone, and I'm done letting men like you decide what I'm worth. He laughed once. You think that man beside you's better than me? He's a thief. He's not a coward, she snapped. Jeb's hand twitched toward his belt. Clara didn't hesitate. The rifle cracked, and Jeb's shoulder snapped back. He tumbled from the horse, hitting the ground with a grunt and a spray of dust. His pistol fell useless beside him. She walked toward him slowly, boots crunching gravel. He groaned, half upright, blood seeping through his shirt. You always were the cold one, he rasped. No, she said, standing over him. You just never cared enough to see anything warm. Reed appeared behind her, face hard. Lanton arrived moments later, gun drawn, eyes sweeping the scene. It's done, Clara said. Lanton holstered his weapon. We got the rest. 2 dead, 1 wounded. 1 ran. We'll find him. He looked down at Jeb, bleeding into the dirt. This one's yours to deal with, Miss Whitlock. He's not on any list of mine. Clara stared down at the man who had once called her Barren, who had walked away with nothing but his own pride in hand. She knelt, retrieving his revolver, and stood again. Take him, she said. Let him rot somewhere small. Let him have nothing. Lanton nodded. He'll hang soon enough. They left Jeb groaning in the marshal's custody and turned back toward the ridge. The sky was black now, full of stars and silence. The battle was over, but the dust hadn't settled inside her. Not yet. Reed walked beside her, limping slightly. "You could have killed him," he said. "I did," she replied. "Just not the way you expected." He nodded, understanding. They reached the horses. Clara paused to look back once more, to where the fire had burned and the blood had dried. The canyons held secrets no longer. The reckoning had come, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel unfinished. The seasons turned with the patience of stone. Summer bled into autumn, and autumn let winter come quietly. Snow dusted the edge of the canyons, clung to the tops of the corral fence, and painted the roof of Clara's cabin in soft white. Life, once tense and broken like a misfired shot, now settled into something steadier, though not without its echoes. Clara stood by the stove, stirring stew with one hand, the other resting against the curve of her belly. Her fingers moved absently, tracing the shape through worn linen. It still surprised her, this unexpected truth growing inside her, this contradiction to everything Jeb had ever spat in bitterness. Barren, he called her. Useless. And yet here she was, full of quiet life and defiant proof. Reed came in from the cold, stomping snow off his boots, arms laden with chopped wood. His movements were slower now, not from injury but from contentment. A man who'd spent most of his years looking over his shoulder now moved like someone who'd stopped running. Clara hadn't asked him to stay. He just never left. "You should be resting," he said, setting the wood down beside the hearth. "I'll rest when the stew's done," she replied. He smiled. "You say that every day. And every day, the stew's worth it." They shared the silence like a quilt. Outside, the wind pushed softly against the windows, not threatening, just reminding them of its presence. Reed sat and pulled his coat off, warming his hands by the fire. "You think the marshal's serious about the land offer?" he asked. "He's not a man who speaks without thinking," Clara answered. "He knows we earned peace. Just didn't expect it to come with deeds and borders." Reed chuckled. "Funny. I spent years taking from the law. Now it's giving me land." "Not giving," she corrected. "Granting. And not for free. We paid in lead and blood." He looked at her then, long and searching. "And you? You think you can stay still? Live here with a thief?" She didn't answer immediately. She ladled stew into 2 bowls, set them on the table, and only then met his eyes. "I think I've known nothing but survival," she said. "Even before Jeb. Even before this land was mine. I've always been holding on, waiting for something to prove I mattered. And now," she placed a hand on her belly again, "now I don't need proving. Not from any man. Not from you. Not from him. Not even from myself." Reed nodded slowly. "I'll build the crib tomorrow." They ate in silence for a while, each bite grounding them further into this new rhythm. Outside, a lone coyote howled far off in the canyon. Clara didn't flinch. The past had already sent worse things howling at her door. Later, she stood outside, wrapped in Reed's coat, staring at the sky. Stars hung low and bright, and the moon carved clean edges in the snow-covered hills. She felt the baby move, a flutter like a leaf on a river. She placed her hand there again, smiling to herself. She thought of her father's voice, deep and steady, teaching her to aim with both eyes open. She thought of Jeb, lying in a jail cell, finally made small by the justice he'd always scorned. And she thought of the women in town, women who once whispered about her barrenness, her loneliness, now watching with wide eyes as she walked by with a life inside her and a man beside her who did not flinch from truth. A new story was taking root in this land, not one born of vengeance or shame, but of endurance, of choice. Reed came to stand beside her, quiet. His arm brushed hers. "You still worried?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, not anymore." "You think it'll be a boy or a girl?" She thought for a moment. "Doesn't matter. Either way, they'll have more than I did." Reed nodded. "We'll make sure of it." She leaned into him slightly. He didn't move away. For the first time in her life, Clara felt what it was to be truly free. Not because her enemies were gone, but because she no longer needed them to define her. Birth was coming, But it wasn't just the child. It was her. And she was ready.